Welcome to Sino-Warfare with Ralph D. Sawyer. In employing spies, Sunzi delineates 5 spy categories: local, internal, turned or double agent, dead or expendable, and living. They are described as follows. For local spies, employ people from the local district. For internal spies, employ people who hold positions in their government. Double agents employ the enemy's spies. Expendable spies are employed to spread disinformation outside the state. Provide our expendable spies with false information and have them leak it to the enemy's agents. Living spies return with their reports. Although the categories are remarkably clear, a few comments based upon the understanding that evolved over the centuries in annotations to the art of war might be useful. First of all, even though local spies and local guides are both individuals who inhabit or may have lived in a particular area, local spies actively seek information rather than simply retelling what they know. Thus, Duyo says, rely upon the enemy's local populace to know the true nature of the enemy's interior and exterior, vacuity and substance. Thus, after recruiting and employing them, you can have them act as observers. However, the importance of local guides should not be underestimated. Sunzi says, one who does not employ local guides will not secure advantages of terrain, and one who does not know the topography of mountains and forests, ravines and defiles, wetlands and marshes cannot maneuver the army. Now, although unstated until centuries later, while local informants and defectors who themselves can be unsurpassed sources of information if they previously occupied positions of authority, these people have the greatest familiarity with an area and its developments. They can also be blinded by the limited nature of their perceptions and handicapped by partial knowledge and rumors. This is why trained agents tasked with ferreting out information and ascertaining the actual situation must still play a role, and why multiple types of agents should be simultaneously dispatched. Now, while differentiated from local spies, internal spies are obviously a subset. They're distinguished solely by being government participants, and therefore they're presumably more knowledgeable about plans and the powerful. However, somewhat surprisingly, in later centuries, commentators strangely pervert Sunzi's explicit qualification, who hold positions in their government, to become somewhat the opposite, people who have lost their positions, or while otherwise well-connected, have become disaffected or jealous. For example, in the Tang, Duyo explicated the entry by saying, employ those who have been negligent in their governmental responsibilities, the sons and grandsons of those who have suffered punishment or execution, and families that have been degraded by exploiting the fishers. Another noted commentator expanded the list of possible candidates. Among the enemy's officials, there are those who are intelligent but have been negligent, others who have made errors and been punished. There are also those who are greedy despite having been favored, and those suffering in inferior positions, or who haven't been employed as emissaries, who have been defeated, who have suffered loss and want to show their talent and ability, or are unreliable and deceitful and have duplicitous intent. As with all enemy personnel that are co-opted into revealing information or actively spying, they must be enticed with ample profits and persuaded by prospects of future benefit. Then, as Du says, you can ferret out the enemy's nature and investigate what plans they are making against you. And in this way, quote, you estrange the ruler and his ministers, bringing about disharmony. In Sunzi's conception, the turned agent's defining characteristics is having been an enemy agent, and his utility mainly supplying information about the enemy. Sunzi says, through the knowledge gained from them, you can recruit local and internal spies. Your expendable spies can spread their falsehoods and use them to misinform the enemy, and our living spies can be employed as times require. Now the crux is gaining information, even though later military thinkers occasionally envision them actively acquiring it. Therefore, any inclination to equate them with contemporary double agents, individuals whose real value is spying upon the enemy, is misplaced. Conversely, as the centuries passed, turned agents were increasingly valued for the disinformation role they could play. This is reflected in the two means employed to turn them, overt and covert. The overt approach emphasized treating the agent well and employing generous gifts and enticing promises to persuade him to furnish useful information and betray his state. Coercion, including threats to the individual's family, might prove necessary, though Sunzi advised gaining their cooperation with the prospect of profits. In contrast, the success of the second, more subtle, covert method depends upon the individual never realizing he's been compromised in order to secretly manipulate him or feed him false information. The best summary of this approach, one which we'll consider again later, is found in Li Jing's Art of War, an early Tang Dynasty work. If the enemy sends a spy to probe our vacuity and substance, investigate our movement and rest, ferret out our plans, we should pretend being unaware, house him generously, and treat him well. Subtly talk about false reports and specious affairs, showing how they will materialize in the future. For then what we need will be what the enemy loses. By relying upon their agents and turning them, if they take our vacuity to be substantial, we will be able to exploit the ensuing enervation and realize our aim. In actual practice, from the warring states onward, anyone who conveyed disinformation, whether or not they had any connection with the enemy or had been employed as spies, tended to be turned agents. Thus merchants, emissaries, prisoners, as well as the peripatetic persuaders whose identity was clearly known and who basically acted as lobbyists to persuade the authorities in other states to accept a desired course of action, were all deemed to have functioned in this role. The meaning of the term fan, to turn, had thus obviously broadened to encompass any returning to the enemy's domain where affairs are then discussed. According to Sunzi's characterization, and those of later writers, some of them should therefore be considered disinformation agents, expendable or not, others living or internal spies who are active in foreign lands. Again, in Sunzi's conception, so-called expendable spies are essentially propaganda or disinformation specialists, though their role can be structured for specifically military purposes. Furthermore, whether by spreading disinformation through various means such as rumors, slander, subverting, expendable spies played a disproportionately important role in Chinese history. While they obviously couldn't hope to escape punishment if caught, death was certain if the misinformation led to misdirected expectations that could, or actually were, diplomatically or militarily exploited, especially if the enemy had believed they turned the agent. Now, although the notion of manipulating the enemy and balking their plans appears in the Art of War, and it became a cornerstone of Chinese military thought, the annotators to the Art of War unnecessarily make the process overly complex by suggesting the expendable spy is deliberately sacrificed on the expectation he will either voluntarily betray the state or be coerced into divulging the information. In either case, he's to be furnished with false information or allowed to witness some specious activity and draw his own conclusions. Thereafter, if he isn't captured, he has to somehow disseminate it, such as by deliberately leaking it to known security personnel or accidentally divulging it. To ensure his reports are believed, some thinkers advise staging reinforcing scenarios. However, the noted commentator Duyo states, to effect a false affair outside the state, pretend to leak something. Have our spy know it, so when he goes into the enemy's midst and is captured, he will certainly divulge the affair to the enemy. When our adversaries prepare for it, but we act differently, the spy will die. He also says, agents who come, who learn of our specious affair, and return with it. But then nothing goes as planned. As these agents don't know our real secrets, they are called dead agents. Dumu, another famous Sunzi commentator, subsequently interpreted the passage somewhat differently. When an agent deployed in enemy territory doesn't actually know about our affairs, we should create some deceptive, visible evidence. Then we should let him know about it, so he will sincerely transmit it to the enemy and gain their trust. If we then undertake some discordant activity and our spy can't escape, he will be killed by the enemy. Why the agent would divulge any information except under instructions or duress isn't clear, but the intent to manipulate and the activist aspect of spycraft, a core component of Sunzi's doctrine, are. Whether to make it more palatable to Confucian critics, or out of a lack of ruthlessness, or simply from humane compunction, several later thinkers who discussed the out-of-wars concept of expendable spies propose employing criminals. For example, at the end of the Qing, Zhu Fengzhao wrote in his book of spies, have criminals act as agents and die in order to implement our agent activities. However, far earlier, Xiao Shicheng's commentary to Sunzi stated, enemy prisoners, rebellious officers, and those guilty of serious crimes or offenses that have been remitted by payment should be cautioned not to let our affairs leak out. Then pretend to talk about something secret and let them hear it. If you let them escape, they will return home and the enemy will certainly believe them. After the affair develops, they will certainly die, so they are called dead agents. Now, although it's human nature to believe information acquired when under duress, Xiao's comment that the enemy will certainly believe the accounts of defectors and prisoners runs contrary to a continuing well-expressed awareness in both Chinese and Western military writings about the unreliability of such information. Nevertheless, several well-known historical incidents attest to the ploy's sometimes startling success. A couple of men of rank, including Li Sheng and Tang Jian, who are discussed at length in my Tao of Spycraft, unluckily became expendable agents when circumstances changed and their information, formerly accurate, was reversed. Now, the final category, living spies, are expected to undertake clandestine activities in foreign countries, with or without cover stories or diplomatic credentials. Though their limitations would be recognized later on, as we will discuss, all the commentators emphasize the importance of employing worthy men with astute judgment, individuals who can appear to be fulfilling a public role, such as an emissary, but remain subtly observant. As they have to be deceptive, Dumu suggests they should outwardly seem opaque, but inwardly be brilliant. His commentary says, select among your sagacious talents and wise planners men who can access the enemy's imperial relatives and aristocrats, who can investigate their movement and rest, and learn their affairs and plans. When they have acquired the information, they return a report, so they're called living agents. They are, of course, what the world commonly considers spies, or clandestine agents, men who penetrate the enemy's lair, acquire crucial information through various means, and return to make actionable reports. Here their targets are not the disgruntled or disparaged, but men closest to the exercise of power. As always, thank you for watching.